permitting every level of society, from individuals to higher social structures as universities and schools. Racism is not just the insults that an individual in the public square utters to a member of racialized communities, nor the denial of human rights because of racial differences. Racism exists every time a young Black, Indigenous, Arab, or other minority youth starts to feel their heart quicken because they see a police car in the rearview mirror and they are afraid of being stopped again. Yes, again. It is in every experience of shame that a Black woman experiences when someone tries to touch her hair because of its texture. Racism exists whenever Black students are rejected from working in groups with other students at universities or punished more severely in schools because they are Black. Racism exists whenever a racialized person receives poor care in our hospitals or Black children are unjustifiably reported to child welfare services across Canada. Le racisme existe à chaque fois qu'une personne noire se fait demander d'où elle vient et qu'elle répond une ville du Canada et que son interlocuteur réplique « Mais d'où venez-vous vraiment ?» Le racisme existe en dehors de nos maisons, dans nos téléphones, dans nos paroles et attitudes au-dessus de nous, dans nos structures sociales. The purpose of the present training is to inform us about racism, the elements which fuel it in its history in Canada and its impacts, train us on how to build an anti-racist society which is socially just and helps everyone reach their full potential, and commit to not being anti-racist, non-racist, but to becoming anti-racist. As Angela Davis wrote, in a society, it is not enough, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. Although race is a social construct and does not exist per se in the human species, we are called upon to deal with and engage with any injustice, discrimination, prejudice related to color of a person's skin. This commitment is an important and essential step for a socially just society. Our understanding of anti-racism, that it is a proactive commitment to become aware of both the privileges and prejudices related to skin color in our society, to learn about ways to eliminate them, to commit ourselves by highlighting, informing, educating, and combating all forms of racism. Cette formation est constituée de 2 modules. Le premier module traite des généralités liées aux enjeux raciaux, définit les concepts clés, fait un historique du racisme au Canada et apporte des éclairages pour mieux comprendre le racisme. Le second module traite des conséquences du racisme, offre des outils pour savoir repérer les propos et les comportements racistes, adresse l'intérêt de vivre dans une société antiraciste et socialement juste, de ce que nous pouvons faire contre le racisme et offre des pistes pour s'engager dans l'antiracisme et donc pour mieux agir. À qui s'adresse cette formation? À toute personne, élèves, étudiants, enseignants, professeurs, employés du public et du privé, travailleurs des services sociaux et de la santé. J'ai envie de dire à toute personne soucieuse de vivre dans une société juste et égalitaire, parce qu'elle permet de s'informer, de réfléchir sur soi, de prendre conscience de ses propres biais et préjugés, de se former et ensuite de s'engager. Car il est temps pour que la couleur de la peau ne soit plus un élément déterminant dans l'avenir des personnes, ainsi que leur santé physique et mentale. Enfin, je veux remercier les membres du laboratoire Vulnérabilité, Trauma, Résilience et Culture, V-TRaC, qui ont travaillé au développement du contenu de la formation et dans les recherches documentaires Je veux aussi les remercier, mais vraiment chaleureusement, Saba, notre coordonnatrice de recherche, mais aussi tous les autres étudiants de l'équipe des mobilisateurs sociaux qui ont travaillé dur pour permettre la réussite de ce mois. I would like to thank also all the individuals, the leaders from the Black communities and other minority communities and community organizations who shared with us their experiences of racism at different levels of our society, which inspired us to develop these materials. We hope that at the end of this training, people will understand the urgency of fighting racism and realize that it is not enough to simply be non-racist, but that you must be commit to becoming actively anti-racist. La formation se fait en ligne sur notre site santémentalepourtous.ca, mentoringforeveryone.ca, et c'est totalement gratuit. Pour terminer, laissez-moi avoir une pensée pour Joyce et Chakran, car ce qu'on n'a jamais dit, ce qu'on n'a pas dit dans cet événement triste, pour la traiter ainsi, les soignantes ne devraient pas s'inquiéter une seule seconde que leurs collègues les entendaient. Ils ne devraient pas s'inquiéter parce que, tout simplement, ça ne devrait pas être la première fois et elles ne devraient pas être les seules. I will quote Johnson, who said, "We must move out of our present comfort zones to confront personally the painful of usually emotional work of doing anti-racism every day, to actively, consciously, and consistently working to eliminate racism by rejecting systems of privilege maintenance in favor of human dignity, mutual respect, and liberty." I also have the pleasure to introduce Dr. Carl E. James. First of all, I want to thank him for accepting to be our special guest today. Thank you, Dr. James. Dr. James holds the Jean Augustine Chair in Education, Community, and Diaspora at York University, and is the Senior Advisor on Equity and Representation at York University as part of the Division of Equity, People, and Culture. He's professor in the Faculty of Education and holds equus appointments in the graduate programs in sociology, social and political thought, and social work. Please welcome Dr. James. Thank you.
Thanks very much for having me, and thanks very much for everyone who's joined this discussion. And I'm going to present, and I'm hoping after I talk for a minute, the time, I'd love us to have very, very involved conversation. And so be prepared to ask me questions, and hopefully we will get the conversation going with some of your ideas. I think I also want to add to that discussion about racism, and to think more broadly about racism, not only as individual or institutional and societal, but think of racism as systemic. So we are very familiar with how racism is the individual acts of aggression, individual calling each other names, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's at the individual level. And then we always have, but individual level interacts with the institutional level. So the policies, programs, and the institutional that goes on, that in that level that happens. And then the society's culture operates reinforcing, reinscribing, or giving legitimately to what goes on in the institution and individual practices, behaviors, attitudes, et cetera, et cetera. And altogether, we see that as systemic racism. So when we talk of racism, and some of my comments will be talking about racism, I want us to think of it happening at all levels and expecting it that's going to react, and people are going to react to racism in ways, in different ways, depending on where they are. So given that context of racism, and given that we are here to also learn about racism and probably understand what we might do in order to change the context in which we're living and to make racism less onerous on us, but of course, one of the reality we have to constantly confront. I wanted to engage with thinking through some ideas I've been having, some concepts I've been thinking about with regard to how racism operates on Black lives, on the Black students. And I would like to hear what you think of some of the points. So talking about how universities and schools can facilitate Black students' wellness, then I start thinking of how through this wellness, how we might think about wellness and what, first of all, before thinking of wellness, is what contributes to having to deal with racism, and how confronting racism and all aspects of it might help us move to wellness. And of course, we can engage in that discussion fully when we get there. But I was trying, as I was preparing for today's presentation, and of course, thanks very much for inviting me, and been thinking about it ever since I was contacted to present. I've been looking around, listening, paying attention, and so something came to me on last week, Friday, on October 23rd. There was a segment on CBC radio program, The Current, by Matt Galloway. And he featured 3 Black university students, and they were interviewed on what it's like being a Black university student in Canada. There were 3 of them, Jamal, Priscilla, and Layla. Jamal is at the University of Ottawa, Priscilla is at Mount St. Vincent University in Halifax, and previously was at the University of Alberta, and Layla is at the University of Guelph. These students spoke to the experiences of Black students on university campuses, and they talked of the interactions with professors and faculty members, as well as interactions with campus staff, and especially, and we know, and we have enough of these evidence about the campus staff means security, and we know the incident in Ottawa. But before I go on to talk about some of the ideas these students shared, let me set a context that I believe is important for us to consider. The 2016 census of Canada indicated that children under 15 years old represented 26.6% of the Black population, while only 16.9% of Canadian population were in that same age category. Sorry. And Black students are more likely to be born in Canada than their counterparts. So as you'll notice, just over a quarter of the Black population in Canada, it was at that time less than 15 years old. So some of them would be now in university. And so when we see that significant proportion of the Black population having that age, and it's a fairly young population, and notice we are younger, younger than the average in the Canadian population. In that case, then, we have to constantly be thinking about what's the significance of this age to the Black population as a whole, and then the larger society. So the fact that slightly more than 1/4 of the Black population is being schooled at this time means that COVID-19 is not merely having a major long-term effect on the schooling and education of Black students, but on the Black communities as well, and on the economic, social, and political situation of welfare of Black communities, and by extension of the Canadian society. So consider also that Black and other marginalized group members are overrepresented among those affected by COVID, which has to do with the fact that they tend to be among those in low income situations, tend to be using public transportation and live in heavily populated communities. So we need to take into account the impact of the coronavirus on the schooling of Black students, given the age, given the youthfulness of our population, given the fact that COVID tend to have a disproportionate effect on our population. And therefore, within this context, we have to understand and pay attention to racism. And we have to also consider that at this time that systemic racism and protests related to systemic racism is coming to the fore, and how people are resisting that and how people engage in that. Another factor that we need to consider as we seek to address wellness among Black students is the influence of their families, particularly that of their immigrant families. This influence informs Black students' educational aspirations and their trajectory. Research has shown that the immigrant or immigrant grandparents hold up education, especially post-secondary education, as the means by which their children will be able to attain upward social mobility, and by extension, attain the social and economic successes to which they aspire. And understandably, many of these young people have come to accept this premise and of course, make these high aspirations and of course, will intend to do so. And similar aspirations would be held by people who have lower socioeconomic background. When we think of all this then, we have to think of not only our Black students or Black youth negotiating or having to deal with racism, but think of this connection to class, to income. And so we have to think of these intersectional relationships when we think of what we're doing and how we're thinking and having people work towards wellness. That intersectionality is not only related to sexism, racism, et cetera, but all the other identities of gender, race, sexuality, and so forth. So when we think of wellness, we're going to have to think of all these things coming together and all these things having to be addressed when in the lives of young people. So in accepting this proposition of education as something to which Black youth aspire, some youth aspire to it and go to school, put all the energies into school, and some think of using sport as a way of getting scholarship to pursue post-secondary education. And I should add that many of these parents are thinking that it's post-secondary education that will be the important factor in that will yield the success. Indeed, research has shown that increasingly as we move further, and statistics Canada has shown, as we move further in life over the years, more and more jobs are going to require university education. And therefore, if they're going to require university education, therefore, students or young people must start thinking of going to university as a way of attaining the education to which they aspire. And statistics Canada show that knowledge is not lost on Black young people. For example, and some of the statistics have shown that many Black young people, somewhere in the 80% of them will think of very early attending and going to post-secondary education. But at the same time, when we revisit them later, nearly about 60% of them will say they will ever get there. While the results for the white population or the general population is about 10% higher of those people say, 10 to 15% higher of those who say they will want to get there and do get there. So we're dealing with how racism operates and sometimes when young people come to understand how racism is affecting the lives and the trajectory and the opportunities. And hence we need to take all these into account when we're thinking of wellness. As I was mentioning about the parents and community, I also think of how young people also think of or use education as the way they feel they're obligated to their parents and to their community to do something. And they strive to, quote unquote, give back to their parents or to their community. And in doing so, they will put everything and put all their efforts into that possibility. Now, I always think of when students think, or Black young people think of going on to university, I always think it's just family that they might be doing it for, but not necessarily. As I said just now, it's sometimes the community plays a role. For example, some years ago, I conducted a research with Black youth in the Toronto area, and I had a sample of oversampled students who were living in, or young people who were living in, a marginalized community in Toronto, and I compared their responses to those who were living in, in the general Toronto area. Both groups of people, those who lived in the general Toronto area and who were living in the marginalized community, said to me that they aspired to go to university and get a university education and would be applying themselves to do well in order to prove that as a Black person, I can do well. Here's where you're seeing this proof of having to do things is a way of resisting threat against racism. And ultimately, what I want us to think about, how all these things, trying to resist racism, can come back as a health condition that Black young people have to, must negotiate and we need to think about. So those Black youths that I interviewed in Toronto all wanted to go to university or wanted to do well educationally. But while some in the general Toronto area were interested in doing well, just to prove that Black people or Black young people could be successful like everyone else, those who lived in the marginalized community, and that marginalized community was had a number of Black people, and it was thought that would be seen as largely a Black area. Those people living in that community wanted to do well, not only because they were Black, but because they wanted to prove that a Black person coming from that neighborhood could attain the educational success like every other people. So what does all this say is, again, the word that comes out is, the theme that comes out here is how Black students are feeling strongly that they have to prove things. So especially they have to prove that they have to attend, that they can attend university, and they work on that idea that they have to prove to their teachers, their peers, and their guidance counselors that they're just as capable of handling university. And we know about this because we know about how streaming operates as a way in which Black students are not encouraged to go to university, and their determination to prove they can push them at the sense of having to work hard and prove that they're able to do that. And we're well aware that Indigenous people as well have streamed into what we call applied and local developed educational programs, which disadvantage them from going directly into university. So here's where racism operates in what I would call in a systemic way and in an institutional way in which teachers and others might play a role. And sometimes teachers might also be encouraging students to do well and to go to university, but at the other hand, others might be giving them different messages. So in light of this discouragement, it is understandable that many Black students would be in university believing that they have to prove themselves and having a desire to go against the stereotype that demonstrate Black students cannot handle university work. So in doing so, what we talk about, they work on the notion of working harder. And they try to work harder than their peers, believing that it is this way and only this way that they will be able to make it in society. In a research I conducted over many years, over and over again, we get the theme that Black youth students will say, we have to work twice as hard, or we have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that we can do this thing, or we have to prove that we're intellectually, quote unquote, just as good, or we have to prove that we're better than our white peers in order to succeed. Talking about the experiences on the CBC's show last week, Priscilla explained how she policed herself in order to feel more comfortable in her classes, since she was sometimes the only one of few Black students. She said that she felt the need to work twice as hard and prove to herself and to her classmates and professors that she was meant to be there. She had to do all this against society's messages that constantly present Black students as not academically gifted or inclined. This assertion was to counter the stereotypes that undermines the potential of Black students because of the racism that they experience. In countering the stereotype, Black students tend to find themselves in situations which Claude Seale and Jeffrey Arison call stereotype threat. According to Steele and Arison, stereotype threat is a situational predicament in which people are or feel themselves to be at risk of confronting as a self-characteristic a negative stereotype about one's social identity. Stereotype threat can be a contributing factor to long-standing racial and gender gaps in academic performance. It is important to know that anyone can be vulnerable to stereotype threat, but it's particularly seen, and they were doing it with Black students, especially when they're going against that construct of the possibilities that are laid out for Black students. In addition to stereotype threat, we have to think of the racism that Black students experience on campus. Recently, we have seen and been hearing of incidents of racism on university campus across the country. Take, for example, the use of the N-word by professors in their classes at universities such as Ottawa and Western. And when Black students have taken offense and object, often academic freedom is invoked. And as Jamal commented on the radio program last week, and he is at Ottawa University, he felt let down, but not surprised with how his university handled the matter. Black students are saying that situations like these are indications of faculty members and their peers seemingly being more bold about racism and feel comfortable in expressing racist ideas in their classes and taking them up in their classes. Reflecting on her experience at Western University, it turned into Demartis, who explores in her recently published book. And the title of her book is They Said It Was Going to Be Fun, Race, Campus Life, and Growing Up. And she talked of the difficulties of navigating through white spaces as one of the few racialized students on the university campus. She writes, I'm a woman of color talking about racism, sexual assault, and about violence. People don't believe that unless there's research behind it. And she indicated that she wrote her book to tell of the toll that these issues were having on students in university. She writes, it felt like myself and other students of color were crumbling. Our mental health was going down. It was a bad time. I wanted to write something that could act as a companion or warm hug for people like me. People who are going through it now or went through it 20 years ago, but need to know what had happened and make sense of it as it continues to happen. Another point I want to bring out in this whole discussion is what is called impostor syndrome. Again, because of the race, because of our we're not seen as people who might be on university campuses, whether as students or professors, there is this whole notion called imposter syndrome, which is closely related to and the imposter syndrome means is experienced by and repeatedly people being repeatedly questioned about their presence on campus and of their intellectual abilities by professors. They're being questioned by professors. Corindale writes, imposter syndrome can be defined as a collection of feelings of inadequacy that persists despite evident success. Imposters suffer from chronic self-doubt and a sense of intellectual fraudulence that override any feeling of success or external proof of their competence. They seem unable to internalize their accomplishment, however successful they are in their field. High-achieving, highly successful people will also have the experience of the imposter syndrome, which doesn't equate to self-esteem or lack thereof. In some cases, it is an attempt of people to be perfectionist. So in our society, as I would argue that in the neoliberalism of the multicultural discourse in our society, conveyed the realities of Black life on others and us, to believe that we have to constantly be navigating these racist stereotypes, which have a disadvantageous effect on the educational journey of Black students. And so in having to work hard to prove ourselves, and prove that we are intellectually just as good, we constantly also have to prove, in addition to that, we have to prove that we are legitimate people on university campuses. And that's seen when security guards stop Black students to find out if they're students, or stop Black professors to find out if they're students and legitimately on these university campuses. So what all this amounts to is extra work that Black students have to do because of racism. And ironically, sometimes the extra work that's being done to prove self and working hard and be successful sometimes amount to feeding the idea that hard work is what's required to be successful, and not racism being a barrier to that success. So what it seems that we're caught in this situation where, on one hand, if we work hard and be successful, we prove that work hard is the one, and therefore we're getting there on merit. And then the other, and in doing so, the idea of it's about hard work and not the institutional racism that's operating to disadvantage us. And I also want to think, when we think of these things, think of how all these things, like having to prove ourselves, having to work harder, and having the predicament of the imposter syndrome on Black life, and the emotional cost this will have on Blackness. Some scholars refer to it as Black tax, which is considered part of the cost of being Black in the society, where white supremacy mediates individuals' daily journeys. In the article, proposing a concept of the Black tax to understand the experiences of Black people in America, Robert Palmer and Larry Walker writes, our concept of a Black tax is not connected to finances, but is grounded in a psychological phenomenon. Specifically, our definition of Black tax is a psychological weight or stressor that Black people experience from consciously or unconsciously thinking about how white Americans perceive the social construct of Blackness. Blackness in America is often portrayed through a deficit lens and associated with racial stereotype. The cognizance of how Blackness is defined by the dominant culture, coupled with the unjust treatment of Black people, have endured and continue to be subjected to due to racism, resulting in a psychological burden known as the Black tax. This tax may elicit a behavioral response. And they went on to talk about their own experiences trying to deal with the Black tax. So what can we do? Or what can be done? The students, and I named them earlier, undercurrent made several points that I think are relevant for us to consider as we think about wellness and providing wellness on university campuses. One of the points that Jamal makes is don't forget to enjoy your Blackness, and not always have it to be defined by an outsider or external gaze. And so it means that if you're going to enjoy Blackness, it means that we're going to have to nurture ourselves to feel that we are legitimately who we are and legitimately on university campus, and therefore not having others define. And therefore, it's that concept of enjoying Blackness that is going to be something that's going to take lots of effort and time in doing so. So it is important to build community among Black students if we are going to enjoy Blackness. Another, Layla said, we have to find joy in resistance. So it's not just about being resilient, she said. Remember that an active resistance is also joy. Joy is also resisting because in spite of everything, you're going on, you're saying, I repeat this and that. What we seem to be happy, we're all doing this in the midst of a pandemic. So therefore, we have to continue to push along in order to enjoy ourselves. So that is talking about reframing resistance. And I think through resistance, we might get people to think of the worthiness of our legitimacy in the Canadian society and the legitimacy of the history of Black people in Canadian society, which is something that is absolutely critical for us to expect as we move into doing the anti-Black racism work. In a report from the University of Guelph in 2016, Black students also recommended how they might talk about developing a more healthy situation for themselves on their university campus. They talked about establishing a student support network. They talked about doing a strategic review of how universities recruit and when and where universities recruit and how they hire faculty members to work with the students. And they think that faculty should be representative of the Black students in that university. And lastly, they also talk about we need to have meaningful engagement with students, both among ourselves and for university faculty to have such meaningful engagement with each other and with the students in order to move forward. And as I was reflecting on this, I kept thinking of, yes, a number of universities today are talking about anti-Black racism and putting in place some programs. At my university, they're hiring more Black faculty, and we're actively engaged in discussion about how we might respond to Black students much more and respond to their needs and issues. But as we do that, I keep wondering, once we put these in place, is it just a passing time for universities to do that? Are universities going to continue to work and change the process and the system that have been so disadvantageous to Black students, one. And the other thing I wonder about is what little universities do, we have to be cautious about. Sometimes I think we have to be cautious, because if sometimes we get too excited, we might be let down. And therefore we might have to start all over again. But what this means, though, is that we have to be actively anti-racist in our approach, not only for ourselves and for our work, but for making those who are coming to university after we leave the campuses that they would want to find once they get there. I will end with that and therefore engage us. I think we have lots of time left for an active discussion, correct?
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Dr. Carl James, I'm sorry.
No,
merci beaucoup pour merci beaucoup pour votre conférence. Ça a vraiment été enrichissant puis intéressant pour tout le monde. Juste avant la période de questions, I would like to let Dr. Victoria Barham, la doyenne de la Faculté des sciences sociales, faire un petit mot. Mais juste avant, j'aimerais beaucoup la remercier aussi pour son support tout le long du mois, son support pour nos événements et pour notre mois du bien-être de la communauté des étudiants noirs. Donc, thank you so much, Dr. Barham, and je lui laisse la parole maintenant.
You are still muted. I'm sorry.
Am I? Oh.
No, Dr. Barham.
Oh.
Okay, I think I've got a voice. So I just want to, first of all, thank you so much for the introduction, but I just want to check that there isn't going to be a discussion of Dr. James's remarks before I do my thing. Are we going to just do are we going to come back to the discussion afterwards? Yes, okay. So, yes. Okay, so I just want to build a little on what has been said so far. I'm so honored to have been given the opportunity to participate in this discussion because the issues that were raised, the black tax, I have to confess, I'm an economist. I teach students about tax theory, and this is a concept that resonates so strongly with me. But the notion that the students are having to work harder, etc. For me, I'm a university administrator, and the question is, how do we move forward? Okay, here in this conference, in the context of the activities of Black Students Wellness Month, we are speaking to friends. We are speaking to people who are aware of the importance of these issues, we're on a journey together. But when we leave this environment, we find ourselves, all of us, having to work hard to establish what to many of us seems to be self-evident facts. So what are these steps that we can take? How can we get there? And this is, for me as a dean, the challenge that I have to face. How do I work with others in order to move the needle? The fact that this conference today has, that we're launching an actual anti-racism training tool, donc l'outil que Jules-Marie a présenté au début, pour les administrateurs universitaires, ce genre d'outil est d'une utilité inestimable. On a toutes sortes de collègues, on a toutes sortes de populations étudiantes, on a toutes sortes de membres du personnel administratif qui savent qu'on a des défis, qui sont très conscients du fait qu'il y a des problèmes de racisme systémique, mais évidemment, ils ne comprennent pas le vécu de leurs étudiants, ils ne comprennent pas le vécu de leurs collègues. Aujourd'hui, j'étais au téléphone, aujourd'hui même, j'étais au téléphone avec un collègue racialisé ici à la Faculté des sciences sociales où elle était en train de me parler des défis qu'elle vit à chaque fois qu'il y a une assemblée départementale, à chaque fois qu'elle doit rentrer dans sa salle de cours. Ces défis de notre population académique BIPOC ne peut jamais être sous-estimé. Mais évidemment, comme on a fait allusion en fait que c'est pas juste les activités, c'est que pour l'instant sur le campus de l'Université d'Ottawa, toutes ces questions sont d'une pertinence, d'une importance extraordinaire parce qu'on a des professeurs qui semblent penser que la liberté d'expression est en opposition à la création d'un environnement d'apprentissage qui est sain pour nos étudiants noirs. And you know, it is tragic that as a university and as a faculty that we would be tearing each other's eyes out because we are so poorly educated that we do not understand that these different concepts, as Dr. James underscored in his remarks, that creating a learning environment that is positive for our racialized students does not have to be in conflict with academic freedom, for example. The important, you can't, I hate to say this, but you know, academic administrators are not all powerful, okay? As a dean, as the president of the president of the university, the provost of the university, the capacity of academic administrators, academic leaders to bring about, to enact changes that will truly make our campuses, whether it be our campus here at the University of Ottawa, whether it be campuses elsewhere in Canada or elsewhere in the world, to make campuses genuinely inclusive. Unfortunately, we can't do it on our own. We actually do need the active support and collaboration of our entire community, but of course, in particular, the community, you know, our racialized community. We need better tools, okay? We talk about the need to increase the proportion of faculty members who are racialized. And I think there is, I genuinely believe that there is widespread agreement that this is an important goal. But across the University of Ottawa campus at present, we are hiring 30 faculty members a year. We are going to be waiting for such a long time if we rely on, if we are stuck with only 30 faculty members a year. We've got to look for other ways. What are some other ways we could imagine increasing the opportunity for our racialized students to study with faculty members who can inspire them, who look like them? One of the initiatives that I am championing as a dean is the creation of an African Studies program here at the University of Ottawa. And why do I think this is particularly important? Because I want our students to be able to be enrolled in courses taught by faculty members in Africa. And that will mean, and they will be enrolled in classes alongside students in Africa, and that will instantly increase the number of faculty members, Black faculty members teaching on the campus in ways that we cannot achieve if we are simply limiting ourselves to in-person classes delivered on the campus. So we need to work really, really hard to think outside the box if we are going to find practical strategies for moving forward and making a genuine change in the lives of our students and in our faculty and support staff in a meaningful framework of time. I wish to stress to everyone here that if you have ideas, I am listening. I am absolutely listening to your ideas. I want to hear of success elsewhere. Jude Marie and Monica Williams are going to be involved in launching support groups for our Black students, but that's one step, but we've got to do more. We need more unusual ideas because we can't do it just relying on, for example, new hires to provide role models. We can't, the process of decolonizing our curriculum, it's slow. It's slow. What can we do? What are the other things we can do so that we can provide meaningful progress in a reasonable amount of time? Okay, I'm going to stop there. But thank you all so much, because I just think this work is incredibly, incredibly important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Barham. Et maintenant, nous sommes arrivés à la période de questions. We are now at the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the chat and I will read them out loud.
Oui, là, on t'entend très mal par contre. On t'entend très bas et très mal. Hello, Wina, on t'entendait très mal. Je ne sais pas si tu peux réessayer de dire ce que tu disais.
Est-ce que ça fonctionne là maintenant?
Parfait, c'est parfait.
Désolée. Donc, thank you so much, Dr. Barham. Et maintenant, nous sommes arrivés à la période de questions. We are now at the Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to write them down in the chat and I will read them out loud. So for our first question, we have one from Fimo Mitchell. He says, I think we understand what the problem is. It hasn't necessarily changed. The question is, what will we do? Not in a merely reactive manner, but in a proactive manner.
And I don't know, I will maybe ask to Dr. James to maybe say something also on what Dr. Barham said.
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm not the Barack Obama you think I am, huh?
So sorry, Drew Marie. What did you say? I have to.
There is the question from Fimo Mitchell, but also what the dean said about Dr. Barham said. I think she said a lot of things, and I think maybe you can say something on what she said.
Okay, so there was a point at which I lost web connection, so I came back. So some of it I didn't hear. So could you just briefly say some of the points that you would want me to respond to, please?
What she said is what university can really do, because one of the things is about recruiting BIPOC professors, for example, what the university as an administrator, what she can do to help in that.
I like the idea of recruiting professors, but you know, I keep thinking, and I think I welcome the idea of how not only in class, but how it can make she's thinking broadly about how these, you know, we could have professors talking to students both here in Canada and in Africa, and I think that's useful. However, I also feel that too often when professors and others are brought in, the university is sometimes not quote unquote ready for these people to bring their full selves to the job. So are we willing to bring the kinds of curriculum or the kinds of ideas they want to bring? Are the university ready to change some of the reading materials? Are students ready and open to engage in critically with these ideas? So I always think that there is a readiness that we need to also create for some of these things that we are hoping for, willing for, or planning for when we bring racialized people, and in this case, Black faculty members into campuses. That's one. But I also feel the same way too when we're bringing Black students onto campus. What are we willing to change? Because if the curriculum is going to be the same and there are no changes to the curriculum, and we know over and over the years that it's that same curriculum that students are coming to university and they're not feeling identified as belonging, not feeling accepted because the curriculum is not talking to them or anything like that. So there is a sense of, it's not just simply bringing, but there is the absolute need for doing a good overhaul. And I also like the reference to decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing the space of university in order to be able to move forward. And this decolonizing would mean doing a whole look at how the colonized experience is responsible for what we consider good scholarship, what we consider appropriate responses, or what we consider collegial governance, what we consider when students talk about the use of the N-word, all those kinds of things. So therefore, I can go on, but I hope I make the point when we think of the changes necessary, needed as going forward. Yes, there's a response, yes.
So we also had a question from Fimo Mitchell, and the question was, he said, So he said, I think we understand what the problem is, and it hasn't necessarily changed. So the question is, what will we do, not in a merely reactive manner, but in a proactive manner?
Yes.
Can I say something? Like, if we knew the answers, I would like to think that we would have done it already. I say I would like to think because I know that it isn't, that maybe we wouldn't have. I think we're on a journey trying to figure out what the effective practices are. There are, to draw an analogy to something different, one of the challenges on university campuses is the quality of undergraduate teaching. And lots of universities, for example, bring in something called the teaching dossier, which faculty members, because of this is a different tool for encouraging faculty members to be reflective about their teaching. But if you look at the universities which have a teaching dossier and you look at the universities which don't have a teaching dossier, you don't see systematically an improvement in terms of the quality of undergraduate teaching in the universities with the teaching dossier. I'm not personally convinced that that's an effective tool. Our challenge is, we can learn from other sorts of challenges. I am old enough to remember when there were no female professors. Okay, when I was an undergraduate, I had 4 years of undergraduate training and I had 0 female professors. Okay. And we know that, we're not rediscovering the wheel. We know that for female students, that hiring female professors was really important. And so one can, we know that hiring more racialized professors is something we absolutely have to do. It will have an impact. It will be successful. But we know that even today, I was an undergraduate back in the 80s. That's a long time ago. And yet in my area of expertise, which is economics, female professors are still very much a minority. This is why I say, it takes so long to get to these, better outcomes. And so what are the things, these other tools, these other strategies that we could use to sort of, I call it greenhouse the process. I'm looking at Jude and I'm saying to myself, why does he teach 1 3-credit course? Why don't I talk to Jude about teaching 1/3 of 3 3-credit courses? Okay, his teaching, why don't I talk to him so that 3 lots of students could have contact with Jude rather than 1 lot of students? Like, why don't we try and really think outside the box for how to make things move faster for more of our students? But it's, it's going to take creativity and determination, and we act like we have to be prepared to try things and for them not to work. If we don't try, we won't find out that they don't work, but we have to be prepared to try strategies that haven't been used before.
I believe Fimo Mitchell wants to add something.
Yes, thank you for that. You know what hasn't been tried before? Treating Black people like everyone else. That really hasn't been tried before. I went to Concordia, and, growing up, my dad's from Alabama, Birmingham. They called it Birmingham when he grew up because of the bombs. And what I'm saying is, he always taught me you're gonna have to work harder, like what Dr. Carl was talking about. And you go to Concordia, we called it the Ivory Towers. That's what university is called. I'm not sure if white people call it the Ivory Towers, but we call it the Ivory Towers for a reason. It's white. It's a white space. And so what I'm saying is, now, I believe what Dr. Carl was saying about celebrating Black life, celebrating your Blackness, that's part of resistance as well. But resistance can get tiring. And a lot of us are tired because it's a bit disingenuous to be like, what do we do? What do we do? It's been the same problem. And so when wonderful people such as yourself, Dr. Barham, say, well, if we knew, I'm not so sure, because we didn't talk about this, well, we flirted around it, but there's the issue of power. And I'm not so sure those in power want to relinquish that power. And I'm not so sure people want to question what is academic, what is scholarly research, who gets to decide all of this? Who gets, like, I remember being in English class, and I'm a writer, I said, how come I have to take an African-American literature class to see writers that look like me? I've taken an indigenous class to see writers that are, but yet when I take an English class, it's all white with a few women in there. So what is that saying? That somehow our writers, our stories aren't worthy to be in a lexicon? Universities have a deep problem. It's not new. And so let's be real. Let's not act like this is new. And let's also acknowledge why it hasn't changed. And that's the uncomfortable or inconvenient truth that I think we had better address quickly. In the meantime, for us as Black people, I say we stop looking for a system that has never been for us. We fight, we push, but in the meantime, we look after our own well-being. And there's various strategies for that, but I just want to say that real quick. Thank you.
Would you like to add something else to it, Dr. Carl? You are on mute.
I think the point is that, and the point is well taken, is that we know, I think there's a sense of, we know what needs to be done. But at the same time, I also think we haven't listened to, all these years, we haven't listened to Black students, or we haven't listened to people of the Black community. But they've been saying things what they wanted to say, and they've been making public what they want done. But but again, I like the idea that, as Fimo talked about, it's what are we willing to relinquish? What are we willing to change? And who is willing to become uncomfortable with the changes needed? And as you said, people don't easily give up power or the privileges just like that, just because. So it's going to be these kinds of a situation that we're going to find ourselves. And I'm hoping that it's not just this discussion this year, next year, and the year after that, or just this year and next year it goes back to the situation as is. So that's one of the big fear right now is this a passing wave, or are this permanence going to come out of this? Are we going to go back to education as usual, or are we going to reimagine education as Dr. Barham talked about? Can we imagine education that she proposes, and will the university, beyond her, will the university imagine itself responding to the needs, interests, expectations, and potentials of Black people, and therefore respond accordingly? That's the challenge. And that challenge is important, but we always have to get involved in that challenge as well, as we insist that university move along that route.
We have another question for Dr. Jude Mary. They say, can we ask personnel and professors to take the training being offered by the V-TRaC lab?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. C'est vraiment l'objectif. L'objectif, c'est les premières personnes que nous visons, justement, ce sont les étudiants, les professeurs, mais également les enseignants et les élèves dans les écoles et surtout les écoles secondaires. Même si je pense que c'est un travail qui peut se faire avant, mais c'est justement notre population cible pour cette formation, en fait, les premières populations cibles pour cette formation, c'est justement à la fois les élèves, les étudiants, mais également les enseignants et les professeurs. Je pense que définitivement, this training will be useful for them in becoming anti-racist. I think it is the whole of the world society, but I think teachers and professors and students and young people can make change. And I really think young people can change the world, and if they are educated too. So, yes, définitivement, ce sont les personnes que nous visons les premiers. Est-ce que, je ne sais pas, s'il y a d'autres questions, oui, mais quand il n'y aura plus d'autres questions, j'aurai une question pour Dr. James.
So we have a comment from Rashim Khan. We have two comments, actually. The first comment is about what Dr. Barham said. He says, does this work only take as long as it has in the past because we are unwilling to operate outside of the status quo, example, policies, process, institutions? And for Fimo's point, he says that the status quo benefits those in power. They choose the space of progress because they are not ready to share power. I don't know if you guys have anything you want to add to it, or.
I think that's well said, but also the point that needs to be made is and I think Dr. Barham talked about this, is really not only working at this level and getting professors into the universities. We're going to have to also get them in administrative positions. We're going to have to get them as presidents and vice presidents of universities, because the change must be structural. It cannot be individual, and therefore we have to do our best at all levels and be present at all levels of this process.
I couldn't agree more. Like, I couldn't agree more. the structural issues are just so fundamental. And like we all agree, people, in, you know, if you have privilege, it's very, very, very hard to give it up. You know, it's very, but the success of our societies is this also the story of people successfully struggling to make those changes, to make the community more inclusive. And, you know, I'm not prepared to say that we can't get better. I don't know that I'm prepared to say that, you know, I don't think we're going to become a fully non-racist university. I think that's not going to happen on my lifetime. But we can get better, and we will get better. And, you know, and we can get better faster. Like, we don't have to wait another generation. We can get better faster, and we are getting better, or at least we're trying to get better, because students have become just such key partners in advancing this discussion.
Dr. Jude, you had a question?
Yes, I like the fact that Dr. James spoke about Black tax. Several students spoke during the month of activities about feeling a weight on their shoulders to do more, much more. They feel compelled to do much more in order to have the same privileges. They feel compelled because they feel they represent the Black communities and do not want to continue to let the perception that they are less intelligent than others. These feelings, and I know as a psychologist, like, these feelings can have significant impacts on their physical, both physical and mental health. My question, I know the conference is on how universities and schools can do, but my first question is, what message you have for these students, first of all? And the second question is, what can university can do to help these students? Because when you feel you have to do more, much more to have the same privileges, it is a weight on you, on your shoulders, and for your mental health. And when you know you have to do more, much more, because you think, oh, I'm Black, and if I do not like this, people can think I'm less intelligent. And I feel I'm representing the Black people and the Black communities, and I have to set a better perception of my community. It is something, and what you can have.
You know, when I first was introduced to that idea and all those kind of things, and when I first read the Black tax, I said, yeah. But you know, I seriously believe that going around feeling we have to constantly prove ourselves can be a very detrimental thing, because sometimes you spend so much time proving yourself, and the ability that the energy that you put in to prove yourself is not really working, or it becomes what it becomes one of these neoliberal things. It's the individual. You're so that it's all about you. The hard work you do is everything about you. And somehow you miss thinking about the individual, the system and the institution that also makes it, that also responsible for what you have. So I don't know how we can work to change, to shift that, because it's costing too much for the community. It's costing too much in terms of the level of mental illness among Black people, the level of suicide, all those, it's costing, those costs. And not only is that that whole idea of having to work hard and proving yourself, sometimes the community expects that of you. And therefore the community is complicit in pushing that, again, because of all of us are becoming subject to how racism, and we want to challenge the racism and want to do something better. My thing is if the institution moves, and if schools move, and if the society moves to representing Black people, not in terms of the deficit, but in terms of how we enhance the society in which we live. If we move to show, if society comes to realize that the cost of the mental illness or the cost of failure for Black students is a cost borne by everybody in the society, then everybody will come on board. But so that's why I keep saying that we know what's required. I think we're far from there. I think that education is going to have to be reimagined right now and take into account the diversity and the contribution that everybody has made to this society. And I get back to Dr. Barham's word, to decolonize the curriculum, decolonize the courses, do that decolonization, or else we're going to be caught in the same place as we have been all these years. So I don't have an easy answer, Jude. It seems if we're going to be left, as long as racism and of course capitalism and the inequities that exist, as long as these exist, then we're going to be constantly challenging the system and the status quo.
Can I just say, one of the things we've learned with decolonizing the curriculum for Indigenous people is we've just hired Indigenous curriculum specialists for our faculty. This is like, this issue of curriculum is so critical, but you know, white faculty members, they don't know how to do this, so they don't do it. But if we were to, I think this is a wonderful strategy where, you know, if we can hire some Black curriculum specialists who will help faculty members understand how to decolonize their courses, I think we'll make progress so much faster.
And the point that you're making there is this cannot be the Black person's only responsibility. And I totally agree. And so these kinds of issues must show up in everybody's course outline, or else, you know, it's not getting anywhere.
We have a comment from France Anne, and she says, message needed. You have every right to be at the table, to have a voice, to be on a panel, to be part of this university community. You do not have to prove yourself. Be yourself. Your perspective is needed to make things better. And I believe there is another question from France Anne, and she says, how about festivals, celebrations, events like those offered this month to help engage and reinforce diversity and inclusiveness?
One of the things I think of as here, we cannot have, make things related to Black people, Black students as events only. They have to be incorporated into our ongoing program, because when they become events, when these events go, therefore we're back to how things are. So we you know, these kinds of things call for real incorporation of the Black experience in ongoing everyday activities at all universities.
Thank you so much for all your questions. Just a sec. Okay. So thank you so much for all your questions. Maintenant, je vais faire place à Jude pour la clôture.
No more words. Just to say thank you to all for joining us, and thank you all for the questions, and thank you all for that month of activities. And thank you, Dr. James, for that powerful talk. And thank you again to our dean, who gave us a lot of support during that month. And to thank you also to the faculty staff. I think we had a lot of support from Vice Dean and other people in the Dean office. J'aimerais aussi adresser un remerciement particulier aux étudiants du laboratoire, à l'équipe des mobilisateurs sociaux. You did a great job. Vraiment, merci. Malheureusement, avec la pandémie, on ne pourra pas fêter ça, mais je pense que ce sont des choses à célébrer. Et j'ai envie de terminer par dire, par rapport à l'ambiance délétère qu'il y a en ce moment à l'Université d'Ottawa sur les questions liées au racisme, j'ai envie surtout de dire aux étudiants noirs et racialisés de l'université, stay focused. Ne laissez pas les bruits qu'il y a à côté venir vous empêcher d'étudier, parce qu'à la fin de la journée, les résultats que vous aurez, c'est ce qui comptera. Mais ne laissez pas aussi vous détourner dans les combats que vous menez. Mais je pense aussi que vous êtes aux études et les professeurs, l'université, les responsables doivent s'engager eux aussi et eux surtout pour que vous n'ayez pas à vous battre pour des choses qui devraient être justes dans un monde très normal. Thank you again all. Et puis, j'ai envie de dire à l'année prochaine, mais on ne sait pas encore, mais j'ai vraiment envie de vous dire à l'année prochaine. Et peut-être, et surtout, je l'espère, pas en ligne, mais en face à face. Je l'espère vraiment. Et on va travailler pour ça. Suivez nos autres activités parce que les campagnes continuent. Les prochaines rencontres que nous aurons, c'est justement, nous allons rencontrer au mois de novembre les pasteurs, les imams et les prêtres pour parler de santé mentale des jeunes des communautés noires. Merci à tous.
Merci beaucoup.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Chatting in the City podcast. I am here with a friend of a friend, a special guest, Jordan, and she's a pastor. I wanted to sort of get her on here to ask her about, basically the ministry and what she's seen in terms of mental health in the Black community. Because generally speaking, the Black community seems to be more religious, historically speaking, at least. Us younger people were a little, I haven't been to church in like 5 years, so I feel bad about that. But Jordan, thank you for joining me. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm actually fighting with whether or not I should just let everybody call me Jordan, because that's what you said, or if I should tell you that my name's Jordan. But I mean,
did I say Jordan again?
You did.
Wow.
You
okay,
did.
I apologize.
I could just change my name.
No.
I could just change my name.
No. Okay, say it one more time for me.
Jordan.
Okay, perfect. I think I got